Hello, thank you for joining me once again. Today I am continuing the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. I am in chapter 10, and this will be part 3 of chapter 10. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me read the book. I do encourage everyone to pick the book up for themselves and read it, but until then, enjoy the read. Okay, we're starting off on the section, The School of Prophets, on page 139. Okay, enjoy. The School of Prophets. Zayn entered the chamber to relieve Michiel and lecture more about the Atlantean teachings on learning prophecy. Michiel had done too much for the day as it was. Zayn kissed him on the cheek, and as he left the chamber, I bowed to him out of respect and in appreciation for his time and efforts with us. It wasn't just a gesture or anything expected of anyone. Those kind of rote gestures were done at our monastery, but it just sincerely came from my heart, spontaneously. As he shuffled out, bearing nearly half his weight on his cane, he stopped and looked me deep in the eyes. And then he smiled and nodded to me in recognition and humbly gratitude for my gesture. That was the last time I would ever see him. Zain's first words brought me immediately back to my earlier thoughts about destiny, which we started this chapter with. There are those who totally believe in fate. They say all things are predestined and we cannot change them. Others believe that there is no such thing as destiny at all, that we totally make our own reality. The children teach that these two concepts are a paradox, and both are true. The paradox is this: we have free will and shape the future through our choices, but everything is predestined by a definite flow, universal plan pattern. Impossible yet true. Humans are both one with and miniature representation of the universal spirit. Thus, we have the means to take responsibility and initiative in playing an active role in creation. If you were in a city, walking across the street, and someone said, "Watch out, a car is coming," would you say, "Well, if I'm supposed to be run over, I will be," and go on walking blindly across the street? Would that not have been God telling you to watch out for the car? Most everyone agrees that if someone warned them that a car was about to run them over, they would move. Yet, many times, I have heard people forewarn of disaster say, if something is meant to happen, it will happen. Were people who didn't believe in destiny, yet they were making a statement as if they did. Of course, their comment was true, in part, but it was being rationalized by the person to the point of imbalance, even to the point of death. For instance, I have known people warn to begin moving their habitats, told that an earthquake would destroy them if they did not move. They were warned by monks with reputations of very high accuracy in such prophecy. But the warnings went unheeded. Even though the people knew they and their family might be killed or at least injured and lose everything, they ignore it. Why? Because their selfish desire not to leave their land, certain possessions, or not put out the energy it would take to move, etc. outweigh their universal intuition. This is sad but true. In these recent times, I have met many people whom I have warned of various events that would befall them if they did not take a different action. I have, as Zayn had, even warned of devastating earthquakes and been ignored. There are people who would never drive without their seatbelt on, yet they continue to live in an area where even scientists have said a disastrous earthquake will definitely occur and could hit at any time. Yet people continue to stay there, using illogical rationalization. Like, if something is meant to happen, it will happen. But, as Zayn said, they wouldn't say that if a car was about to hit them. Speaking of Zayn, let's go back to his lecture. On the other side of the coin, you have people who believe they totally create everything in their lives and can't be affected by anything else. They believe this to the exclusion of the universal law of cause and effect. Some even believe Jesus' crucifixion was the result of drawing it to himself because of negative thinking. They'll tell you that you won't get cancer if you don't accept the idea. Accept the idea. I guess that's what killed Madame Curie, negative thinking rather than radiation. Some will even go as far as to say you won't die if you refuse to believe you will. Yet no one has proven such yet. Some say you don't need to eat to maintain a physical body. Yet no one has proven such yet. If you really believe the way these people profess, you would come sit in the middle of the road on a highway of blind truck drivers enjoying your dinner. You could walk up to a gunman who's in the middle of robbing a store and take away his gun. Because if you haven't drawn violence to you, you can't get shot. And you wouldn't even need to bother with stop signs, because if you haven't drawn an accident to you, you won't have one. Yet, I don't see any of these people who profess such beliefs doing such things. Why not? Because they still really know inside that it isn't totally true. That things do happen to people that they didn't attract to themselves. But if you noticed, I said it wasn't totally true, because it is partially true. Things do sometimes happen to people that they did attract to themselves mentally. And for the most part, we do create our own realities, our own lives. It takes a great deal of understanding and high consciousness to fully grasp such paradox and not think in an imbalanced manner one way or the other. The children fully understood and teach the universal law of cause and effect in all its paradoxal wonder. This law dictates the results that follow an action or group of actions. Understanding this law is how a prophet determines what things are past the point of no return and are thus destined to happen regardless of what else happens. The companion knowledge to this is understanding the subtleties of free will. How to read and utilize the revelations of cause and effect and the projections of free will have been taught by the children since the earliest days of fair Atlantis. That is why we have sometimes been called the School of Prophets. Where is the School of Prophets? said the novice, who was still hanging around. Zayn looked at him quizzically, then asked, "Who are you?" Before the young novice could answer, Zayn went on. "Oh, never mind. Look around, young one. Open your ears. You are in the school of prophets. It is just part of the overall training received by elder monks at our monasteries, or given personally to novices or elders by initiates of the children of the Law of One who don't reside in a monastery. So, how do we learn and understand the subtleties of free will and its interactions with cause and effect? Contemplate it. Here is a good analogy to contemplate for now. Cause and effect work something like ripples in a pond. You throw a rock and see the concentric circles go out from the point that the rock entered the pond. Most people only realize the rock was thrown in the pond. They don't pay attention to what happens with the ripples. Even those who see the original ripples usually don't see beyond them. But if you watch the ripples closely and keep following them, you see that the ripples may reach a shore or a large rock in the pond, and they bounce off and start making new ripples. And then the new ripples may even interact with the original ripples or make even more reflective ripples themselves. Human events are much like these ripples. One action sets an entire series of other actions into motion. And our ripples are interacting with other people's ripples. These actions can be very elaborately complicated. For instance, let's look again at the examples of the beggar in the street that was used earlier. We said one scenario would be you gave him the money. He got warm clothes, a new livelihood, etc., and lived happily ever after. Wonderful. That would seem to be a positive outcome then, right? Now let's follow the ripples further. What if his new livelihood was making a special kind of glass that was impervious to changes in heat and cold, that subsequently enabled scientists to develop a new chemical for killing insects on farm plants in order to help feed people more? But instead, the chemical had an unknown reaction that began a process of some kind that created weather or solar changes that started ruining the food plants or created new diseases. Many such things are in the ancient prophecies and much, much more. And there will be such so-called innocent people being part of these developments. Or in another scenario with the poor street person, what if you helped him and he lived happily ever after and had children, and one of his children became a lawyer who turned out to be the next Hitler? Altering cause and effects is a very complicated matter with very serious implications. And unfortunately, everyone is constantly altering it just by all the things they do in their day-to-day lives. And they are altering things by thinking and acting from the virtually blind point of view of the separate self. Prophecy can be learned. Using discipline and concentration, techniques of contemplation can be used to trace and interpret the complex ripple patterns excuse me, of cause and effect. These techniques allow the outcome of events to be seen partially or sometimes all the way to their final outcome. But like medical school, there is a prerequisite to getting into the school of prophets. You must also transcend the limited view of the separate self. Then you will know all things that are going to happen in the future, including about your own life. And isn't that fate again, not free will? Both. Don't forget, it is a paradox. But also know this: there are two fields of prophecy. The first is the prediction of predestined events. The second is the prediction of events that are yet to be determined because they involve the free will choices of one or more individuals. The outcome of a situation involving free will choice is difficult to predict at best because you never know for sure what a person might choose because they have free will. Thus, prophecy involving free will becomes what might be considered in gambling terms as an odds and betting game, or in scientific terms as probable factor. For example, when free will is involved, you won't be able to predict that such and such will happen for certain. But you may be able to determine that there is an 85% probability that it will happen, a 45% probability that it will happen a certain way, a 30% probability that it will happen another way, etc. Predicting a free will choice becomes easier to call and more accurate if there are factors that exist that will make the person lean one way or another. For instance, let's say Jack is going to drive by a Chinese hitchhiker tomorrow. And you want to predict whether or not Jack is going to pick up the hitchhiker. Let's also say that we know that Jack is not inclined to pick up hitchhikers and usually doesn't. But he has done it before on rare occasions. There is a leaning that makes it more likely that he will not pick up the hitchhiker. We'll say there's maybe a 5 to 10% probability that he will, given other factors we know about. But if you combine that leaning with a stronger leaning, such as knowing that Jack also hates Chinese people, he is almost definitely not going to pick up the Chinese hitchhiker. Yet, he still could. Phew. And that example was nothing. First grade level stuff in prophecy school. Then there are the situations and events that do not involve free will choices and can be seen and predicted for certain. Such is the case with earth changes. Humans have caused such an imbalance as the result of their past free will choices that certain things will happen within the earth, even if all the beings make free will choices to try and repair the damage. Sadly, it's beyond the point of no return. And it's just a matter of time before the ripples in the pond finish the journey. Don't forget, though, we can still change our own lives. And the effects of these things, which are past the point of no return, can be altered in various ways. Some prophecies involve a mix of predestined events and free will choices. These types of things are very complex. Some aspects of the outcome will be certain, but there will be variations of the outcome that are influenced by the free will choices involved. Thus, the variations are uncertain. Again, the only way to be able to know for sure that you are making the right predictions and the right choices associated with them is for you to have surrendered to the universal will. If you are thus living in a state of unselfish love all the time and thusly in tune with the universal spirit, you will both see far more and more clearly as far as prophecy is concerned. And you will be under the guidance and direction of the hierarchy and universal will. Thus, all your decisions will be as good as they possibly can be and will be right regardless of whether or not you can see their outcome or what the apparent outcome is. If you live that way, Father, then can miraculous things also happen? Miraculous things are always happening. People just aren't aware of it. But to answer your specific question more directly, when you have thus become an instrument of universal will, the hierarchy will sometimes do something through you or around you. Sometimes you will be aware of this taking place. Other times things will happen through you and you won't even be aware of it. Or you'll just be aware of some of the particulars. There is a good example of this in the chapter about visualizations and affirmations. It is a story about an experience I had with a car dealer that could have resulted in serious harm had the hierarchy not intervened. And I had not yielded to universal will. In fact, if you wish, you could skip to that chapter and read the example now, then come back to this chapter. Or you can read about a different type of example now in the next section. That big dealer in the sky. The following is also an example, one of thousands I could give you, of how the universal spirit manipulated events through the hierarchy. This particular example shows how a life was changed and the ripples of cause and effect forged karmic ties. Actually, because it is a brief example, it doesn't really show the extent of the changes that really took place, but it will give you an idea of the big picture involved. The next story takes place after my final year at the monastery. After attaining the final initiation enlightenment, I had begun the easier, harder work. That of a true teacher. But I was needed in other places. So at age 21, I left the monastery and began my work. My employer was the universal spirit. No teamster, but we had a great union. Then, as now, I wandered parts of the world, following the direction and guidance of the universal will. I owned nothing but my monk's robes, no home, no car, no other clothes, no money. I never begged nor ever asked for anything. Yet I never went hungry. I never needed a ride, never lacked shelter or a place to sleep. And I always had whatever money I needed. When God is your employer and your life is truly dedicated towards serving others rather than dedicated to self, survival, such things aren't an issue anymore. God is the true provider of all things and provided for all those days today needs for its humble servant, but everything could come through a variety of normal or strange sources. Often they were offered by strangers whom I had just met, who were going through something intense in their lives and sought out our or my assistance. Some just needed a shoulder to cry on. Such people had always desperately prayed or called out to God for help or guidance at some time in their lives before we ever met. Sometimes amazing things happened around or through me as the universal spirit used me as an instrument for its will. The following story is just one of many similar instances. One day, I was walking through the city of Las Vegas, Nevada. I passed by a door of an office building and heard what sounded like live band music. I felt like stopping and looking in the door. As I looked in, I saw someone I knew from school I had attended as a child. He had once been my best friend. He was in a rock band that was rising to success, and they were practicing there. The space was rented by their manager specifically for practice sessions. My old friend was very surprised to see me, shocked by my monk's garb and how something indefinable was very different about me, other than the obvious appearances. As we were still greeting each other, his manager came in and handed him a paycheck from their last performance. With check in hand, he grabbed his jacket and said to me, "I'd really like to sit and visit right now, but I have to run down to the casino to cash my check." "Of course, you're welcome to come with me if you want." I said, "Fine." And we were on our way. I soon discovered my friend had become a serious gambling addict. We got to the casino, he cashed his check, then headed straight for the gaming tables. Many of you may not be familiar with addiction syndromes, especially gambling, but it is a sad and strange thing to witness. He'd gotten the scent and was so focused and preoccupied with getting his gambling fix, I might as well not even been there. To him, I almost didn't exist at that moment. The casino had a strange atmosphere, stranger than normal. It turned out that there was a dealer strike, and the dealers that were there were strike breakers or scabs. We walked up to a blackjack table and sat down. The dealer looked me over with an unpleasant grin. With not so subtle hostility, he told me I could not sit next to my friend unless I gambled. My friend put down $2 on the spot in front of me. The dealer said, "Fine. Now, we aren't supposed to talk about sex, religion, or politics. I'm going to talk about all three." Then he looked at me again and said, "You look like some kind of freaked out rabbi or something." I was an odd sight for a patron of the Las Vegas casino. I was wearing a monk's robe, sandals, and I had a beard and long hair that hadn't been cut in many years. As the dealer dealt the cards, he began to verbally attack me with insulting questions about me and my beliefs. Interesting enough, though, all his hostile inquisitions were valid spiritual questions. If you ignored the insults they were cloaked in. Insults can only upset the separate self, self's defense, sometimes called ego. By this time in my life, nothing offended me. He found no target at which his insulting arrows could strike, so all he managed to get out of me were answers to his questions. Answers given calmly and lovingly. All the time this was going on, we were gambling. But since other forces were involved, the hierarchy and universal will, I wasn't gambling at all. I was just winning every hand. I wasn't even paying attention to anything but the questions and answers. This particular casino played with the customer's cards faced up, and the dealer was assuming that I was playing the standard way. Stand on 17 or over, and take a card unless I signaled him otherwise. So he dealt my cards accordingly, but I wasn't playing. I just answered his questions and ignored my cards. I didn't do anything with the original $2. I just let it keep doubling with every winning hand. This table was using what's called a 4-deck shoe for the cards. It held 4 decks of cards that would get played before a new shuffle would take place. By the time it was over, I had not lost one hand. And that $2 in chips became a mountain of chips, worth thousands. This alone was blowing the dealer's mind. But simultaneously, the whole time this miraculous winning was going on, we had discussed everything from creation to the ozone layer and the coming earth changes. And all my answers had rung his inner bell of truth. The dealer began to get shaky. The odds of anyone just letting a bet ride and winning every hand in a 4-deck shoe were astronomical, virtually impossible, and no one would know the better than a dealer. My vibration, composure, and answers to his question resonated within the center of his being. Combining all this with my appearance, what people generally considered Jesus looked like, was too much for him. He was relieved by his supervisor, and another dealer took over the table. All the money was lost with the first hand from the new dealer. To me, my winning was clearly for the benefit of the dealer, my friend, and a few others at the table. But my shaky previous dealer had headed off to the bar behind us and was chugging along, straight Scotch as fast as he could pour. Minutes later, I sensed something behind me. I turned, and there was the dealer walking towards me like a zombie, with one arm outstretched and shaking. He came up to me and touched my shoulder, as if to see if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't really there, or I was actually some delusion that came from a bottle of scotch. But alas, I was real. He turned around and went back to the bar and continued to drink. This incident had a real dramatic impact on my gambling addicted friend too. But that is another story, not for this book. Many years later, I visited an organic farm in a rural community in the south central part of the U.S. A very happy, friendly neighbor came over to visit, and before too long, he told me his amazing life story. Apparently, this nice man had been a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas, and for some unknown reason, He had a total nervous breakdown while dealing during a strike and completely lost all his memory and mental programming. The breakdown left him as blank as a child, and he had to completely re educate himself, all from a bed in a psychiatric hospital ward. He also reprogrammed himself with the help of the psychiatrist. He had a basically Freudian view of the world and didn't believe in synchronicity or such things. Yet another story. With his new outlook on life, he semi retired, happily breeding dogs at his little rural home in the woods. Do I need to tell you who this particular ex blackjack dealer was? Well, that's it for now. That was the rest of chapter 10 in The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. I am truly, truly grateful for everyone who has taken the time to listen to me read the story. I do highly recommend for everyone to pick up the book for themselves. And until the next time, we'll be reading chapter 11. And until then, enjoy your day and hopefully you'll go pick up a book for your own. Okay? Bye.